and we're making some good progress, and we are always welcoming people who share that mission. A community that cares about equality and fairness. We like to boast that we're probably the only organization in the county where we are diverse at leadership, Black and whites working together, and that in of itself is a learning tool for everyone. So we always invite people to come join us. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jeff, would you go next?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Anne Marie. We, as the Boulder Area Labor Council, are extremely proud to join with our fellow organizations engaged with this campaign. People may not be aware or think that unions are something of the 1930s and 40s and 50s. In fact, the Boulder Area Labor Council goes back more than 140 years in this area, representing largely people of color, immigrants who are working in the mines, who are being exploited, and who reached across their cultural differences, their cultural linguistic differences, and formed unions with each other and formed the right to buy affordable housing. I know of one union member that his great grandfather is very proud of the fact, he points to the house when I was marching in the Louisville Labor Day Parade, says, that's my grandfather's house. He made boots for miners and he owned that house. And that's what we need to do. We need to build a multi-ethnic, multicultural relationship with each other to fight for a common goal, because that's exactly what unions are about. We always fight for all working families, not just those union members. We fight for working families, for working housing and affordable, attainable housing in Boulder. And that's why we're very proud to be one of the organizations backing this effort. And we hope you'll engage with the full 4 sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. My name is Anne Marie Jensen. I'm the director of a new organization called the East County Housing Opportunity Coalition. We were formed about a year ago, just a little less than a year ago, started just in time to hit COVID. And we had 2 meetings before we weren't able to meet anymore. So we have been doing virtual information sharing and participating in city council meetings and county commissioner meetings, trying very much to keep affordable housing at the forefront of the communities in the eastern part of Boulder County. If you want to get more information about our organization, echocolorado.com, and if you're not on our newsletter list, I think you will find a lot of useful information about what's going on locally in the eastern parts of the county, and sometimes we even cover the city of Boulder, as well as things that are going on nationally and at the State House on affordable housing and attainable housing, workforce housing. So we would love to have you join our mailing list, and thank you for being here. We're so glad that so many people care so much about our community that you would spend your time learning more. And in the work I've been doing with ECHO, one of the things that I have experienced is that so many people want to engage on this issue, but they don't quite know where to begin. They don't feel they are well educated. They don't feel that they want to show up at a city council meeting and speak because they don't want to get asked questions that they're not going to know the answers to. So this is at the beginning of a series that is designed to take people to a place where they will at least begin to get a comfort level in understanding what we mean when we're talking about housing in our communities and what our needs are. And so we're starting out this night with a session by Denver Councilman, former Denver Councilman Albus Brooks, who now works for Millender White Construction as their VP. but who has done a really good job of looking into the housing and zoning policies in the USA that have contributed to the problem and why they are rooted in segregation and in racism, and why we have suburbs, communities like many in Boulder County that are so white and so unaffordable. And he's going to take us through that conversation. And then Reverend Lydia Ferrante Roseberry is going to talk a little bit about what that means to us morally and why community development is a moral issue. And then we're going to break out into some breakout sessions, and we have a whole slew of volunteer facilitators to help get your feedback on this, the things that Councilman Brooks presents to us and what that means for us and how we might do things differently. And then as we go through this series, we're going to also look at local things that have been done, policies that have been put into place that have made Boulder County more expensive. And why some of those, we're not going to be judging about whether they're good or bad, but we're going to be looking at the fact that they have indeed had an effect on the housing costs. And then we're going to look at what is the gap between housing needs in the county and what is available. So who can and cannot afford to live in Boulder County? And what happens if we don't do anything? What if we just kept going on the way we are? We're going to look at that. And then we're going to have some examples of things that are going on that are positive. In our second session, we have several projects that have made a difference, and we are going to profile just some brief profiles of maybe 4 projects that are working well, so that you can get an idea that it's not hopeless, that communities can make a difference when they put their mind to it. And then on the third session, we're going to look at some of the tools that people around the country and in Boulder County and in Colorado have used to try to make a difference on housing. And we're going to break into the very serious question of single family zoning and what it has done to our communities. And then we're going to do some breakouts by various topics, and you'll have to choose a topic. And then we're going to come back to, again, exploring, all right, now we've got some examples of tools. What do we do with them? And then lastly, in our fourth session, we're going to try to talk about organizing and how we organize to make a difference. And what our hope is that we create in all the communities in Boulder County that are represented here, a organizing committee that's willing to work on this, and that we explore here in these sessions what those organizing committees would need to be successful. So that is where we are. And I am pleased to introduce Councilman Albus Brooks, who Councilman, just to refresh your memory, you have about 20 minutes for a presentation and 10 minutes in question and answers. But one of the things, when you and I talked, we didn't know that we would have as many participants as we have. So our breakout sessions are going to be squeezed pretty tight. So any of you who are speaking at any point who have the ability to cut your presentation a little to give a little bit more room for the breakout sessions, that'd be great. If you can't do it, that's fine too. But we did not realize we would have as much interest as we have tonight. And so we want to give our breakout sessions as much time as we can. So that was 20 minutes and 10 minutes for questions. And I would like you all to put your questions in the chat, please, rather than shout them out, so that we can try and facilitate making that happen. And actually, Megan has a chat document with questions for Councilman Brooks specifically. And Megan, if you would resend that out so that it can go in the chat. And then all of you who are introducing yourselves, I forgot to say, we will not have time because we have so many people to allow you to introduce yourselves orally. but doing so in the chat, we will save it. And we're really grateful that all of you are identifying. If you didn't in the chat identify where you live, could you please remind us where you live? Because we're working in many communities around the county, and we don't want to call you about something that doesn't impact you. We want to call you about things that do impact you and that you would really care about. So please let us know where you live, if you what city you live in the county, in the chat as well. Councilman Brooks.
Well, hello, everyone. I am excited to talk to you all. Anne-Marie and I talked a while ago, and I'm fired up for several reasons. One, and you don't have to call me Councilman, I'm Albus. I'm an ex-political figure, which feels so good in this day and age. Can I tell you right now? But one, while I'm really excited, I grew up in Boulder. Now, not really. I grew up in Los Angeles, but I was a freshman and I graduated from CU Boulder, played football up there from 97 to 2001. And I just feel like Boulder allowed me to become a man. I learned so much there. And we're going to talk about some of the stuff that I learned that wasn't so good. But it was an incredible experience. And I've been following you all as I've been the president of Denver City Council and working with Boulder City Council folks and the mayor and stuff. So it's so great to see you guys. And then I also want to say this. Well, one, I left my email in the chat. I see a lot of people chatting, so you may lose it. But if there are any questions, direct questions, I want to have a conversation, feel free to email me so you can grab that. But I want to say this to you. Do y'all know how transformative this is? The work that you're doing right now will change the lives of people in your region for years to come. I'm telling you right now. You are speaking into existence people who are going through pain right now because they can't afford rent. They can't afford a place to stay. And you're right now speaking a place, a sense of place, a sense of belonging, and a home for each and every one of them. Think about that. That's what this whole session is about. And so I really want you guys to think about that. But we're going to get in and I'm going to tell you, there's going to be some hard stuff in here. It's going to be some stuff maybe you didn't know about, but there's also going to be some hope in here. And as Anne-Marie outlined that whole 4 sessions, I actually touch on all of them in 20 minutes. So let's go. Buckle up. Let's get ready to go. I'm going to try and share my screen here. I usually use Microsoft Teams, so just bear with me if you don't see this right away.
Looks good.
Okay. Is it in presentation mode?
There you go.
Okay, great. So I just want to put this stuff here so that folks who want to share, I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and let's just continue sharing ideas. I have networks all over the country of people who are housing advocates that are sharing ideas, and I try and share my stuff on social media. The last week hasn't been a lot of housing sharing. It's been getting some stuff off my chest, if y'all know what I mean. It's been a kind of a crazy week for all of us, but traditionally I'll talk about a lot of housing policy all over the United States, and would love to share ideas with you all on that. And so that's my contact information. My name is Albus Brooks, and I work for Millender White. Millender White is a contractor, but we're also a developer, and we have a large value around affordable housing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We've actually done a lot of affordable housing working with Boulder Housing Partners. I believe there's some folks here from Boulder Housing Partners and developing for affordable housing in Boulder. And we're excited to be a part of your city and doing that. Wow. It's been a heck of a year, huh? And I believe that this slide really encapsulates what we have experienced this year and a lot of the undergirdings of what's going on in the United States, the racism that we have been experiencing. The caste system. I'm reading an incredible book called The Caste System. It's sitting right here by Isabel Wilkerson. If you do not have that, you want to get that. I don't even know if you guys can see it, but it's called The Caste. And I'm reading it right now. It's incredible. But if you look, whatever idea you look when you see the screen of this Black Lives Matter deal sign in a city that is on fire and a riot that has just happened, it helps me think about Martin Luther King's quote, "A riot is the language of the unheard." And I think a lot of us wanted to look, why are we burning down our own cities? And it says Black Lives Matters and not, why does it not say all lives matter? And all of these questions. But I hearken us to look at, why are they rioting and why do people feel unheard? What's going on in our society where they don't feel heard, right? And we could talk about 400 years of a lot of racism. We could talk about a lot of things, but I just want to focus on one iconic and very important piece of legislation that I think we all agree on that underlines racism in this country and a cataclysmic effect that we are experiencing today. So we all I believe in the GI Bill, right? World War II, it comes out. We have these soldiers that go and fight in World War II against Germany and all these folks. And the Congress comes together and says, these individuals, when they come back, we need to give them benefits. My grandfather was one of them. At that time, African-American soldiers at the beginning of the war were not allowed to fight in the war. They had to dig latrines for white soldiers. But they went anyway. And by the end of the war, there were some platoons that were allowed to fight. But here is the thing that most people don't know. 1.2 million Black soldiers were denied their benefits. Same soldiers that left with white soldiers to Europe to fight. Same that put their lives at risk, were denied the benefits from the United States of America because of the color of their skin. Many of the states in Congress, the representatives that were from Southern states would not support these Black soldiers getting benefits. And so right then, this is what it allowed to happen in this great divide between white and Black America. So on the left side, where we have white America, you have the GI Bill, we had white flight. As folks came back, these benefits allowed them to put a down payment on home, and we actually subsidized suburban sprawl with this benefit. So what we had was white flight out of cities, right? We subsidized suburban sprawl. We saw political representation, intergenerational wealth, sentencing, leniencies, access to higher education, access to healthcare. And in white America during this time, we saw compounding interest and gain. And in Black America, we saw redlining. We're going to talk a lot more about redlining. You don't have to raise your hand, but does everybody understand what redlining is in communities, especially in inner cities? We redline communities where there are African-American populations where whites did not want to mix. And we redline those communities so that African-Americans did not live in other parts of the city. They could not live. They could not get bank loans. They could not get capital. They could not even invest in a home outside of this. And then we called that redlining. And I'll show you a lot more about that. We saw eminent domain, condemnation laws, urban renewal, race riots, Jim Crow laws, voter disenfranchisement, mass incarceration, health disparities, exclusion from the GI Bill, which I just talked about, the wage gap, and it equaled compounding loss and pain. Two Americas here. Divided, and may I say, divided intentionally from the hands of the federal government that had a chance to be about uniting us. So when people talk about uniting, you know, I remind folks that it was actually our federal government, it was our laws that did this. We were entrenched in this. I'll go on because I could stay here for 20 minutes, but Anne Marie says we only got 20, we got to keep moving. So when we begin to learn this history, I've said this many times. I don't care. I'm not worried and I don't fear a Ku Klux Klan member. The person I fear is someone who is silent and who is neutral. Someone who knows that this is wrong, but I'm not going to say anything and I'm not going to be an advocate. I love this quote here. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. And I love this picture because it represents a lot of well-meaning individuals who are looking at the city. This young lady here, she's looking at the city, she's reflecting on it, but does she know the issues, the racism that built that city? Does she understand that? Because if she doesn't, and she begins to live in the city and be about building city, even our best intentions end up being oppressive if we don't understand the historical analysis of the cities we're working in. So, you know, I want to talk about these things, but I also want to give you guys some good, you know, tools of education so that you can equip yourselves. This is one of the best books. You guys are city builders, all right? You're talking about housing. This is one of the best books on how our federal government and how our country segregated our cities. And it's called The Color of Law. And I really suggest reading it and taking some time. It is, I've read it 3 times, and I tell you what, it allows you to see from a legal perspective of how our federal government and all of these organizations were complicit in segregating our cities. It's pretty disturbing. Okay, I want to just go through this real quick because I think this is very helpful in understanding segregation in our cities. If you look at the blue area, anti-Black racial entropy, and this is the idea that we don't want to be whites, don't want to be in Black communities, Black anything. And so we see Black flight, or we see white flight. We're seeing it still today in the city of Denver. You know, my kids are in school, and if those schools have over 50% people of color or 50 Black folks, we start seeing white children and parents take them to other schools. That is anti-Black racial entropy. What is the issue? When that number goes, man, what if I had that issue when I went to the University of Colorado? Oh my gosh, there's too many white folks here. I can't go here. It doesn't make sense. And it's a part of the racism that is within our community. And we see this again and again through the segregation of our cities. Spatial mismatch theory is once we segregate white folks from Black folks, then we put all of the assets for the city into areas that are apart from the Black communities. So that's the spatial mismatch theory. We put the assets of the community centers and the grocery stores and all the things that keep a community healthy, we push them away. And the culture of poverty theory is now that we have segregated these Black folks, we've put all of the benefits in other communities. Now we look back at the Black folks in the communities we created and say, you need to get out of this culture of poverty. Why are you living in this culture of poverty? Well, you've set it up. You've designed it as such. And that is why we are living like this. I represented a part of Denver that was a red line community, and it was now gentrifying. And many of the new white community members that lived there started to say to me, why is there no grocery store? Why are there no benefits in this community? And I was like, you are experiencing the segregation of our communities. That's why there's no benefit. It was designed this way. So what do we do about this, right? I've given you some really hard realities of what our history is in America, in American cities. But what do we do about this? I'm so glad that the faith communities is a part of this conversation. I am a recovering minister. I was ordained for a little bit after I went to college, and I worked in the city, working with young men of color. And one of the words that I loved was shalom. Oh, it was my favorite word, because a lot of people just think shalom means peace, but no, it means so much more. It's a Hebrew word that brings out the word of restoration, repairing, and building inclusive prosperity. Don't you love that? Repairing is how I see my work now in building cities, is we need to repair what has been broken. We need to repair the horrible intentions of these legislators and folks like that who have designed these cities to be segregated and for people of color to fail. And so I believe as you all start thinking about how you can change and transform the Boulder region, that needs to be your posture to repair. First, you got to figure out what's broken and then repair. So how do we rebuild? I never thought that I'd be running and leading a city as the president of Denver City Council, one of the fastest growing cities the last 10 years. And here are some things that we put into practice immediately. We have city planners, and typical planners go to neighborhood associations, and those neighborhood associations tell them, we don't want affordable housing, we don't want this, we don't want that. And we quickly saw that this was an oppressive system that was set up for folks who were privileged. And so we said, planners, we as city council are directing you to meet with church members, community members, gang members. We had a list of individuals from the community. We wanted them to get a perspective that was out of their traditional perspective. We have to do that to change the way we build cities. If there are city folks on here, on this call, this needs to change. We've got to think about how our planners, who our planners are going to get input about how to build their city, because there are a lot of people in there who will continue to build segregated cities. Redesign, always looking for how we can have inclusive environments. There are a million examples in Boulder and other places that have exclusive opportunities, playgrounds, or centers. We got to make sure, we got to be thinking about how to bring mixed income opportunities and for any individual to come to the table, to come together. And then lastly, and this is really where I'm at, is rebuilding and construction and development. When we rebuild now in communities, we actually want to represent the communities that we're serving in, meaning the cultural breakdown. What is the ethnic breakdown of those communities? And we want them to be on our job. So we hire women and minority-owned businesses for our trade partners. We make sure they're hiring formerly incarcerated individuals, formerly homeless individuals. Bayard Industries is a great example. CEO is a great example of who some of the people we work with. We want to begin to build wealth for the broken in our community. Not a lot of people talk about that. I'm going to talk about it all day, because that is what it's going to take for us to rebuild and repair our communities. Okay, man, if someone can name who this is like gold stars. Who is the individual? Just take your microphone off. Who is the individual with the scissors? Can anybody name who that is? Okay. It is Nipsey Hussle. He is a famous rapper, and he was unfortunately killed recently. Nipsey, before he got into the rap, he was into, selling drugs and doing all this kind of stuff, and really had his life in a rough area. This picture was taken on this building that he just purchased, where the owner of the building was calling the cops on him when he was selling drugs. And he raps about, instead of that guy calling the cops on me, he could have asked me how my life was. He could have asked me about the oppression that I'm going through. He could have asked me about the racism that I'm experiencing. But now I'm gonna buy the building and have young Black men come work for me so his whole idea was, I'm gentrifying my own hood. And I love this because this is about sharing the power and inspiring the people in our community who don't see themselves as owners, who don't see themselves as leaders. And the folks on this phone call who are working with people in the community need to figure out how we inspire them, not to empower, but for them to find their power and lead. It's a big difference. I think, we talk a lot about empowering people. That associates me giving power to you because you don't have power. No, you have power. You have power, but there's a system that's been set up to make you think you don't have any power, right? So, okay. Build affordable housing. Here's one thing that we learned. Everybody talks about affordable housing. Rarely do people talk about who goes into that housing. We need to name the people who go into that housing. I remember the first time I was at ribbon cuttings with these affordable housing units we were doing in Denver. I was so excited, but I was seeing young, smart, bright, white college kids move into these, and they, they need housing too. However, I want to see the mom with 3 kids who can afford the place that she's living right now in the housing. So we put together a deal, and it's working with HUD in Denver, and there's other cities that do it, that allow for displaced neighbors, individuals, to be have the first right of refusal in these units. And so this is something that's really important. This particular development is in my neighborhood. It's called the Clara Brown Commons. I hope there are individuals who know who Clara Brown is. She is famous in our state. She was a former slave that became a multimillionaire and gave all her money away to the poor. And so in this development here, it'll be between 30% AMI to 80% AMI units. And we're so excited for this development. And there's a long story about how it was taken, but it was actually taken from an evil individual who was trying to do a lot of bad on this ground. So my idea here is making sure we're pushing for the neighbors who need it the most, housing who they need it the most. Don't just put the housing together and don't think about who lives in it. Okay, this is sometimes controversial, and it shouldn't be, but creating entrepreneurial centers specifically for people of color, because of those laws and those issues that I talked about before. Equity is paying back what was taken, right? So how do we really be about equity? We have to strategize, and we have to be strategic and target individuals who have been left out, pushed aside, disenfranchised. And we are creating an entrepreneurial center of color in Denver in 5 Points, which you'll hear about here in a second. And this is going to be a place where we bring technical support, we bring mentorship, inspiration, and we connect entrepreneurs with other businesses. 5 Points in Denver is a historic African-American center. It was called the Harlem of the West This was the part of Denver that was redlined, and famous Lena Horne, Charlie Parker, jazz musicians used to come here in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And they played downtown in front of white crowds, but because they were Black, they couldn't stay downtown. They had to come to 5 Points and stay. And it in turn made 5 Points that's Mecca. Well, 5 Points has been empty for the last 30 years. And just recently, we wanted to redevelop it, but we wanted to redevelop it with an intention of people of color being on the forefront of that. So a lot of the gentlemen here that you see here, some of the leaders of that, Robert Smith, I'm sure many of you have heard Robert Smith. He went to East High School. He is a billionaire, but he is all about building Black wealth. He was the guy who spoke at a college and paid everybody's loans. I don't know if you guys remember that at Morehouse. And so what we're trying to do here is build Black businesses, they're Black developers, Black architects, and really give back as a community was really intended to be. This is my last slide, Anne-Marie. I'm sorry. I might have gone over. You know, I'll be trying to preach sometimes. I really want to leave you guys with this quote. The city of the future. It isn't one with flying cars and towers that reach the heavens. It's about regenerative ecosystems, inclusive economies, and just societies where equity and social mobility go hand in hand. Do not tell me that your city is economically viable. Show me someone who is making minimum wage and that they have a pathway to be a middle-class individual. That is a successful economy. And that's what we want to be about. And so as you guys begin thinking about housing, we also have to think about jobs because, you know, we're in this housing situation because rents have outpaced salaries, right? And wages. And so those are things, all this stuff goes hand in hand and we got to think about it. So sorry I went over. Thank you so much.
So I'm going to start with a couple of questions while others have an opportunity to put other questions in the chat. You mentioned a couple of things that Denver was doing that I would like to know. Did they structure it in their ordinances or are they just doing it by practice? So you mentioned that they don't just, the developers meet with communities in need. They don't just meet with the neighbors who are going to oppose, that they've targeted certain people. Is that required of them or is that just something they started doing as practice?
Good question. It's not developers, it's city planners. And I actually think once you get a development, I mean, that's way too far in the process. You all need to be at the table during the city planning documents. When the city is planning an area, they're planning the heights of the buildings. They're planning, should there be affordable housing? Should there be a park? Who should live there? All of those things. I think that's when you should be at the table. And there are individuals on this call with a planning background. They have that kind of expertise, and that's how you should organize it, right? Then there's the development side, right? And that's a whole nother animal, right? That you need to have folks who understand that piece. And I think the other piece is, does Boulder, and I think Boulder does have, linkage fees, which, if you do a development, you put a linkage fee, it goes into a fund. But is there certain requirements for affordable housing? What I hear from my colleagues around Boulder, you guys' biggest issue is that there's so many people that push back on affordable housing in their neighborhoods, right? And in the Boulder region. And so that's something that will never go away. We dealt with it in Denver. Just to let folks know, I was not elected for my third term. Part of the reason is because I put tiny homes in our communities and I put affordable housing. And so I'm okay, right? Because I'm about pushing the envelope. And you guys got to figure out as a community how you show up to those meetings and build community support to drown out the naysayers, the people who are struggling.
But does the planning department in the early stages, does the city require them to talk to some of the interest groups you mentioned, or are they just doing it by practice?
That's a good question. They have to report back to city council on who they met with. So it doesn't require that they meet with certain groups, but the idea is when they come back to city council, they will be like, oh, okay, you didn't do enough outreach. Let's see who was at your meeting. It's more in the outreach that they did. It's not a requirement.
Okay. So David, David Adamson, do you have a question you wanted to ask that you put in chat?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Albus, beautiful. I was just wondering what you thought, since we regulate the number of units in the city of Boulder, couldn't we also regulate the number of luxury home units in the city of Boulder? Let's have a limit, not on affordable housing. Let's have a goal to get down to 5 or 10% of any added housing units, including remodeling speculatively single family housing as luxury units. What about approaching it from the other way? What do you think about that?
You know, so as a housing advocate, I'm always going to advocate more housing, right? Because I believe it's a supply and demand issue. I would say that I think it's the other way. Oh, you're going to do 150 luxury units? We need 150 affordable units in the vicinity. Right? And so I think that's the key. To me, that's the key kind of segregation model that cities are still doing to this day. They want to put luxury over here, and they say, well, you can have a percentage of 5-10% in a different area, which, I mean, what does that sound like to you all? It's exactly what we went through. And so I'm not so much talking about, if you want to build luxury housing, that's on you. I want the same amount of affordable housing, right? I can't fight you on luxury, right? And so
why not though? Why not?
Well, I mean, you might want to put your energy there, right?
Well, that's all we have in Boulder. That's all we have in Boulder is luxury. So there's no, and that's what creates the segregation. And I'm gonna shut up, but our housing model creates segregation by race and income. That's what it does. We have to change the whole model, don't we?
Yeah, I agree. I just know here's what, David, here's where I live. I can go out my house right now and see people struggling living outside. If I spend more time trying to put a cap on luxury units, that's less time than I have building a unit for this individual outside. And that's my rationale in it. What you're saying is completely true. And it's going to take some soldiers to kind of figure that piece out. But I'm also saying in Boulder, you need housing now. So we agree. We're on the same team. So
that there was a question in the chat that it went to me privately, but given the need for workforce housing and for starter housing for people who maybe are not yet ready to buy a home, and the state's rent control statute that prohibits that, what path forward do you see for folks who are wanting to do affordable rentals, and how might we fix that?
Great question. Great question. That the state is taking up. I just got an email today. I'm gonna be on a panel with state legislators taking up the rent control issue to really deal with it and negate it so that there won't be that issue, and we can start making sure that new developments have an inclusion of affordable housing in them. What that deal is going to be, it's going to have to be a deal, because there's all kind of viewpoints on how this can happen. What that deal may be is a certain percentage over all new housing may be required for affordable housing. And so I've been seeing some of the legislators say that they're pushing for that. Obviously, people are going to push back on that issue, but it'd be very interesting. So I would say help is on the way on that issue, and let's see what happens in the next session.
Well, and I wanted to ask you specifically as a person who works in the development community now, or the construction community. The development community and the construction community has not often been friendly to affordable housing. And I'm wondering if you're starting to see that change, and whether or not there are potential partners besides your firm. The Realtors Association hasn't always been supportive, but are you seeing any changes, or are you seeing people going to their corners and opposing?
No, I think it's changed quite a bit. And as a matter of fact, I attend the Housing Colorado conference. You guys are all welcome. Please come to it every year. Let me just tell you, back in the day, there was maybe 15, 20 people. Now, hundreds come to that. And they're private developers. I think people really are, I mean, here's a real issue from the development community. They're understanding now business is really struggling everywhere because they can't find workers that can afford to live here, right? And so now it's come full circle for them. Now they're on board, right? And so, and you know, we may judge whatever, but people are at the table and they want to make a deal, and that's part of the reasons why I think at the state a deal may be made for for that rent control issue of 10% across the board, or 15%, whatever number that the state legislation comes up with.
Okay, one more question that is in the chat. Chelsea, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to do it for you? If you can unmute yourself and you want to ask it, and that's all we have time for.
Sure, thank you for allowing me to ask. So many housing experts say that policies like height limits and conservation easements are perpetuating racial segregation. So in Boulder, these policies are cherished by many. And so how do we effectively communicate that these policies are in conflict with our desire to unravel racist policies and become more inclusive to all?
Woo! So I think that's a really good question. Can you I know I just want you to unpack it a little bit. Can you tell me who's pushing that and who's rejecting it? Who are the type of individuals, so that I understand?
Well, let me just interject that they've been in place for some time in the city of Boulder. They're policies that have been in place for 20, 30 years.
Yeah. So they were put in place in the early 70s, which was, of course, right at the time where a lot of the legal work that was done in books, that's outlined in The Color of Law, where
Yep.
It was all happening at that point, and cities across the country were looking for ways to essentially put in place or keep those more racist policies that had been in place prior to that. So, I mean, but now I hear rhetoric, it essentially that romanticizes why we have the policies that we do, and not acknowledging the disparate impact that they have. And so
I would just say this. I think I appreciate your question. And first of all, you got to find out if these policies are by ordinance or if they're in charter.
They're in the charter. Yeah.
Typically, to help folks on the hierarchy of law, it's policy, ordinance, and charter. Policy, is basically a decision that a department head can make. Ordinance takes a certain amount of votes from city council, and a charter takes a vote of the people. And I would venture to say that, getting, and this is in the city of Denver, I don't know if it's a little different in Boulder, but I would venture to say that Chelsea, getting some folks around this, getting some city council members, some folks at the city to understand it and actually have data behind what you're saying, which I agree with, and then figuring out how you put together a plan to say, hey, let's go against this. If we got to go to a vote of the people, we'll go to a vote of the people. But if you're seeing real day, and we've done this in Denver for the last, since I've been there on the last 15 years, of really repealing a lot of these old time, housing laws that have hurt us, literally hurt us. And literally are hurting development opportunities for folks to get into housing. And so that's what I would say. You got to organize and you got to build a group of individuals to go after this. And the other thing I just want to say to everybody, there is not one silver bullet. Okay. So if someone gets passionate, if a group of people get passionate about one thing, let them organize, support that. Just because it's not your thing. I saw this all the time when I was organizing in Denver. I did about 10 of them, right? We had, you need about 50 policies working together to begin to see the momentum go. I'm telling you, and it takes a long time. And by the way, it's hard because people are hurting today, and the work that you're doing will only affect individuals in the future. We're working for our kids at this point. And so just keep that in mind as you're working on these issues, that it's not going to happen overnight. Still keep with the energy, and do not downcast individuals for their ideas because it's not your ideas.
Could I comment briefly on the question?
No, I have to cut this off because
The question is very misleading about Boulder, and I could explain that.
Could you put that in the chat, please? That'd be really awesome, because we're way behind. We're we're not going to have enough time for our small groups if I allow any more conversation. There's a whole bunch of really good questions in the chat that we didn't get to. Megan, will you please make sure you save that chat? And then Dick, I really appreciate that perspective is, not necessarily one that everyone agrees with. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about in our small group. And I hope that you will contribute to that. But some of these questions that are in the chat that people wanted to ask Albus, we have actually earmarked some of these questions for specific topics for future dates. So I'm hoping that we will get into them in more detail. And like the question of single family zoning, like the questions about some of the things that have made our community more beautiful, but also more expensive, and how we deal with the conflicts between the parks and open space and land that we love, and the fact that it's created a shortage. So we're going to talk about some of that at another time, but we have to cut this off now. And
thank you, guys.
And so, Reverend Lydia, you are next on the agenda. And so I'm going to turn it over to you. And Councilman Brooks, you're welcome to join us back at any time. We'll be meeting on the second Monday of the month from 6:30 to 8. And, we welcome your input.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I left my email in the chat. Feel free to email with any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting. Albus Brooks started as a pastor and a preacher and moved into housing, and I started as a city planner doing housing work and moved into ministry. So it's a pleasure to meet you, Albus, and get to and hear your presentation. So I'm the minister of the Boulder Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, and I wanted to talk to you a few minutes about a little bit of my story and why housing became important to me and how it links to my own beliefs in many things. I I grew up in a small upper middle class community in New Jersey, which later in my adult life I learned had been founded in the 1920s with a gentleman's agreement to keep out Catholics, Black people, Jews, anybody other than basically Protestant white people. As such, in my whole growing up in the 1970s and 80s, there was one Black family that moved into town, and they quickly moved out of town within a year and a half. And that was normal for me, right? When we grow up this way, that's normal. When I was 16, I used to go to New York as a, I used to go to New York in with my family. But at 16, and I don't remember the reason why, I took the bus from my little sheltered little town in New Jersey. I took the bus to Port Authority and got out at the Port Authority of New York, probably 1980 or 1981, maybe 82. Think Ronald Reagan years and what he did to the housing and urban development, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, cut it like 75% the budget. I walked down this escalator into what I saw below me on the floor of the Port Authority was just a sea of sleeping bags with mostly, and the image is so vivid to me right now, is mostly dark faces, and I just kind of saw these white eyes looking out at me. And in that moment, that was a moment of revelation to me, or a moment that actually I would say changed my life, because I realized in that moment that my life was completely linked to those lives of those people sleeping on the floor at the Port Authority. And that no matter how much my nice sheltered community had tried through redlining, through their gentlemen's agreements, all this stuff I didn't know about when I was 16, to make me feel like that I was not connected to that, I was. And that led me to study housing and urban development in college. That led me to get a master's in city planning. I actually worked for the General Accounting Office before that and worked in the Department of Housing and Urban Development doing some audits of a program called the Urban Development Action Grants, and kind of learning how they were really wonderful in some ways for bringing money into the city, but they also, destroyed neighborhoods in the, the redevelopment mode that people were doing. And but that led me also, I worked in my city planning days, and I was really glad Albus had an organizing perspective on this. What I found in the 1990s when I was in school in city planning was the idea of the city involvement of local communities was really just a check off. And that I became really committed to having people who were most impacted in the effects of their lives being actually a part of the process. So I love that Albus said the time to get in is when the city's making the plans, not in reaction to a developer. So I did that for a couple of years. I was a tenant organizer in San Francisco. That moment that I had was a moment that I feel like, I knew in my bones, and I imagine many of you in this room know in your bones that the way we have done land use, the way we have done community development is unethical. And we can't change that history of what has happened, but we have to live with the impact of it. And it doesn't mean that because we can't change the history, we don't have responsibility right now to change the future for our children and our children's children. And so that I've committed, I ended up on the ministry side of things. So my ministry is much broader, but it's very powerful for me to be back thinking about housing and the shapes of our communities and how community development is vital to end not only racism, but the economic segregation that we have in this country and how interconnected they all are. But I think, shifting to what we actually know in our bones to be morally and ethically right and beginning to envision those communities is really the job of those of us in this room and those of us who know people out who have some sort of a vision for that. So the question I often ask myself is, now that I know, what do I do? And this series of 4 tonight, these coming Mondays, are going to, I think, move us into the real strategies, the real concrete strategies, from taking what you know, either intellectually or in your bones, and turning it into what do I do. So I'm delighted that there's so many people here tonight, and that this work is continuing in this way. So now that you know, what will you do? And thank you for having me speak here for a few moments tonight.
Thank you, Reverend Lydia. So the next phase, we're cutting short, and we have asked people to go into breakout groups where you will have a conversation about how do we do it better? And this question is not meant to be specific policies, like, you know, we need inclusionary housing, we need multifamily housing, we need workforce housing, but really more of the big picture of what would a community that we want to live in look like? And then we're going to talk in some of the other sessions about the steps to get there. And what would that look like? So I want this to stay big picture, conceptual, and values versus concrete steps at this point. So we're going to break it. I put the question in the chat. So you have the question, and then each of you will have a facilitator in your group. And Megan, if you're ready.
Yep, so I just want to real quick, because people are moving in and out fairly quickly, I have the room set up, but if a few of you don't get assigned, just wait a second and I'll make sure you get assigned. I also am going to put, if you want to, you can take notes in this document that's here. If not, that's all right. So you'll have about, don't look at the timer on your breakout room, but you'll have probably about 12-ish minutes or so. We'll give you a heads up before we close.
Can I say something? We had about 4 or 5 insights in our group that were really important. And I'm sure, judging from Jill, the same thing from her group. Couldn't we just quickly go through? And I mean, our group is poised to report in.
If people want to stay, yes, I would love to have that. If people are available and can stay, we would love to.
For those of us that can't stay, I'd like to see that in writing.
Kathy, that's planned. We'll distribute that. We'll do a cleanup on the dock and distribute it. And it's the basis of our conversation moving forward.
I'm a little confused. Have we lost the rest of our audience at this point too?
No.
We've lost some. We lost about, looks like we lost about
20.
18 people.
We've got 81 people.
Yeah.
Are we reconvening with the whole crew?
We are with the whole crew.
All right, should my group start off first?
Go ahead, make.
Okay, Kristen, will you please report in for our group? Kristen?
Yes, I can. Hi. So we discussed a number of different things, but some of the big things that came up were, in general, as cities are growing, concerns about displacing other people that currently have been living there for a long time. Specifically, something that was brought up was Lafayette, that's growing in the mobile home community. Other things that were brought up were just the general discrimination that we see in Boulder, and how Boulder doesn't look like, you know, a lot of America. It's kind of continuously growing whiter and wealthier, and we're seeing the impacts of that, of a lot of people not wanting to continue to live here, and not a lot of people not being able to live here, and how that's not what we want Boulder to be, and that's a large majority of the push of why we want change. Another thing that was brought up was multi-generational, how, you know, people have grown, lived here, and as we continue to see these disparities of the wealthier getting wealthier, the poorer getting poorer, how people can't continue to live and, you know, grow up in the communities that they grew up in.
Well said.
Is there?
One other insight in our group was that affordable housing for some is a trap with no future, and that we need more market rate affordable housing, more market rate workforce housing that's available for people. And that's the end of our group.
Cool. Anybody else have a group that would like to, we have 1 minute from when all we're supposed to end, but we can keep talking, those who want to, and the rest of you can put it in the Google Doc. Let me just, because some people are getting off, let me just say, so we meet again next month, and we're going to start with a conversation about local and kind of what Dick Harris was sort of trying to get to, a frank conversation about local policies that may or may not have influenced how much things cost in the Boulder County area. So we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about those things, and there may be some differences of opinion about such things, but we're going to talk about those. So a lot of good ideas that have been presented, we have some sort of focus on in our future conversations. So this is not the end, this is just the beginning, and we hope you'll come back.
Let's have a report in from Jill Grano's group.
Okay, I'll try. I'll go ahead and do this and try to do it quick, but there were a number of different ideas which were excellent. One was instead of looking to the past, because that gets complicated, do we look at, you know, our Native American past, our black and white past, our Boulder past of open space? Let's look to the future. What do future generations need? And let's try to plan around our future. Another was, hey, we got to look at this from a neighborhood by neighborhood perspective, because every place is different. And another was, let's get creative with a diversity of housing types, tiny homes, ADUs, occupancy limits. We don't have to just think in terms of black and white, affordable versus not affordable. And then finally, you know, we have folks like really looking at a very humanistic perspective, like we are all equal and those on the streets are us, and there but for the grace of God go I, and let's talk to them and pull those perspectives in and come from an empathetic point of view. So a bunch of different ideas, but all ones that really work together.
Holly, did you want to report for our group?
I'm happy to, Dave. Let me see if I can find my notes real quick. Okay. We were group 5, and one of the first things out the gate for us was that we really need to get more people to participate and get people to come and speak up when housing policy is being discussed. We need to get more people to that table, and I think that's kind of the thesis of what we're trying to get at with these educational forums as well. More people need affordable housing. They're speaking up and showing up. Boulder has a lot of parking lots. Boy, that looks like a land use need that, you know, place where we will be able to perhaps create some housing in the future. There's a need for community education. We have a lot of fear around mixed use and density. How do we begin to work on the community education differently? We talked a little bit about the racial equity plan coming forward right now and some of the challenges around discussing housing affordability as it's associated with the development of that plan. And I talked a little bit, we talked about transportation and the fact that there's always there's big 60,000 people driving into Boulder every day. Well, if they worked, they could afford to live here and they had a community to join here, we would probably knock a big chunk of the traffic issue off. And then finally, we talked about the fact that after the pandemic, the opportunity is really good for us to rebuild something completely different, be it a transportation system, be it tiny homes, be it, you know, different types and styles of housing.
Well, that's a lot. That's awesome.
Tamara, I was going to ask Clara to talk about her comments on vision, if she wants to. Is she still on, Tamara?
Oh, I'm here. I just didn't hear you say my name. I was going on the humanistic bent too, and my group mate reminded us that structural racism or structural oppression. Don't care nothing about humanism. But what I'm really saying about vision is, in addition to intergenerational and in addition to being intercultural, there has to be something that makes people want to be neighbors and that makes people want to live around other people. And I'm sorry, but nobody, since I've been here, and it's been 2008, I want to be here for ultra running. I want to be here for hiking. I want to be here so my dog has plenty of space to run. I want to be here because prairie dogs' lives matter. I have not heard anybody say, I want to be around a bunch of other people. So there has to be something that makes people want to be around each other and share the resources in a creative way, rather than I want to get away from it all, as someone else said in our group that I thought was a really great way of summing it up. There's part of this American dream that you can go out west and get your own piece of the sky. And I don't come from that reality. And so I get out here and I'm like, why are y'all hoarding the mountains? There's plenty for everybody. But there's a real like underlying, you can't put housing on top of people who don't see the value in neighbors.
Well said, sister.
That is a very important point, and I certainly hope we'll capture that. I hope you capture that on your writing and your documents. Anybody else have anything for the good of the order that they would like to speak to?
David did ours, so maybe would you like to just encapsulate?
It was such a beautiful, so lucky to have Dick Harris, who's been at the beginning of Boulder's affordable housing program, which was a little marred by the inability to have it be permanently affordable at the beginning, and that gave a bad taste in everyone's mouth. But he reminded us that we do have a lot of affordable rental housing, and Annette provided the counterpoint of history kind of obligates us to do something better than that. I mean, history obligates us to do better for Native Americans and African Americans and working Americans who just haven't been able to get a piece of the land pie. It's really about the land and who controls the land. And so Annette just shared, coming back to Tamara's point, Annette shared her vision, her picture then, if we have that obligation, is of really diverse, racially, ethnically neighborhoods that are fun to live in, that are people know each other. It feels good. I mean, I think we have a lot of good community experience in the United States. And my vision is about how cars and how zoning has split us apart. And it can be put back together. But anyway, that's more of my, but it was really cool to have Annette and Dick as a counterpoint. And I think it's all brought back to Betsy Martin's wonderful observation about Boulder, that despite our efforts, we have a net shed rate of affordable housing. Because of the large amount of land controlling, single family zoning, we lose 1,000 units of formerly affordable rental housing every year. So that's what's happening in Boulder, that we're creating that barbell society of some permanently affordable rental housing and mostly luxury housing.
Well, that was really interesting. I hope, again, you captured that in writing on your document as well. I think we need to cut this off now. I do want to say in my group, they sort of echoed what you said about work, that you often say, David, about the need for the middle or lower income working person housing, and that there is not any of that happening. So let's go. So we have many of the topics that have been brought up. We have a focal point for them and in our future sessions. So we're going to send out the agenda for the future sessions to everybody who registered, so you can see what we're going to talk about, and we'll send out some follow-up materials. But I think we have to get out now. Sorry that, but I think it's 8:08. We promised at 8 o'clock closing time. Please, all of you who came, we are so grateful. We thank you. We got lots of work to do, and let's keep talking. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Good night. Be well.